everyone. My name is Dania Dunkley, and today I will be lecturing on Chapter 12, Implementation. I hope you all learn a lot from this lecture and find this information very helpful. There are 6 learning objectives for this chapter. By the end of this lecture, you all should be able to 1. Define a logic model and understand its components. 2. Know what happens within the 5 base phases of implementation. 3. Identify and define basic timelines, Gantt charts, task development timelines, PERT charts, and the critical path method. 4. What makes an effective and efficient program? 5. Know the 3 major resources used in establishing a system of management. And lastly, 6. Know the 3 major ways of putting plans into action. The first thing we will be learning about today are logic models. What is a logic model? A logic model is a visual representation of a program's inputs, outputs, and outcomes. According to the textbook, it is a systematic and visual way to present and share your understanding of relationships among the resources you have to operate your program, the activities you plan, and the changes or results you hope to achieve. Logic models are visual roadmaps that help stakeholders understand and see connections between a program's activities and desired outcomes. These models are also very useful in the implementation phase of a program because logic models increase the likelihood of successful program efforts. They help make a program successful because they communicate the program's purpose and expected results. It involves stakeholders, which increases resource commitment, and it improves program staff expertise in planning, implementing, and evaluation, as well as so much more. Logic models contain 3 basic components. The components are inputs, otherwise known as resources, outputs or activities, and lastly, outcomes, which are results, effects, or impacts. Inputs in a logic model are the resources used to plan, implement, and evaluate a program. As shown in the picture, some examples may include staff, volunteers, materials, money, and time. Inputs in a logical model are the activities or interventions in a program. Examples of outputs are workshops, counseling, screenings, and trainings. Lastly, outcomes in a logical model are the intended results of a program and are composed of 3 categories: short-term, mid-term, and long-term outcomes. Short-term outcomes are changes in awareness, attitudes, knowledge, and skills. Mid-term outcomes are changes in behavior or environment. Lastly, long-term are changes in health status or quality of life and risk reduction. Here is an example of a logic model used to control tuberculosis. The inputs for the situation were trained staff, clinics, labs, pharmacies, and health info sessions to help educate the public. These are the intended resources to plan, implement, and evaluate the program. The output is people beginning and completing treatment for tuberculosis. Lastly, the effects or outcome are reduction in TB, otherwise known as tuberculosis, better health statuses, and caring infected individuals. Displayed are all 3 components of a logical model. Now that we all have an idea of what logic models are and its components, we can move on to the next step, which is implementation. What is implementation? According to the National Implementation Research Network, implementation is defined as a specific set of activities designed to put into practice an activity or program of known dimensions. According to the CDC, program implementation involves all the steps needed to put health promotion strategies and interventions into place and make them available to employees. According to the textbook, implementation is the act of converting, planning, goals, and objectives into action through administrative structure, management activities, policies, procedures, regulation, and organizational actions of new programs. Implementation simply means to carry out. Now we will talk about the 5 phases of implementation. Phase 1 is defined as the adoption of the program. What should be stressed during this is the marketing process of the program. The marketing process is planned so that the priority population will still want to join in and participate. It aims at the priority population. Phase 2 is defined as identifying and prioritizing the tasks to be completed. In order to implement a program, planners will need to identify and prioritize a number of small tasks for an effective implementation. Some of these small tasks may include ordering the correct number of manuals or packets for participants, reserving rooms where the program will be held, and requesting equipment. These tasks are small, but are vital for an efficient implementation. To successfully identify tasks, it is suggested that planners use a timetable or timeline. These tools graphically represent the dates, time span, and sequence of events in a program. Some examples of these are basic timelines, Gantt charts, PERT charts, the critical path method, and task development timelines. Here is an example of a basic timeline. The basic timeline is the simplest of all the tools. A basic timeline displays the activities or tasks on a line within the order that needs to be completed. Some timelines indicate the dates that the activities will take place and overall time span of the year to complete them. In this example, the timeline does consist of the dates and order that the activities needs to be completed by. More tools used to prioritize tasks are task development, timelines, and Gantt charts. These tools are very similar to each other, but are distinguished by a few differences. A task development timeline shows a task that needs to be completed, along with the time frame that it needs to be completed in. A Gantt chart ultimately does the same job that a task development timeline does, except that a Gantt chart uses lines to depict the time frame for a task and the progress towards completing a task. Both of these tools encompass rows that represent the tasks that need to be completed and columns that represent the period of times. In the picture above are examples of a task development timeline and a Gantt chart. Once tasks has been sorted out and appropriate timelines along with timetables have been made, planners can now focus their attention on the third phase of implementation, establishing a system of management. This phase focuses on how the program will be managed and the resources used to do so. According to the Business Dictionary, management consists of the interlocking functions of creating corporate policy and organizing, planning, controlling, and directing an organization's resources in order to achieve the objectives of that policy. Management is a vital part within program implementation. Management can also sometimes be challenging because of its numerous responsibilities. Thus, good program management is needed in order to have effective and efficient programs. An effective program means meeting its goals and objectives. An efficient program means utilizing its major resources. The major resources are human resources management, financial management, and technical resources management. First, we'll look at human resources management on the next slide. To begin with, there are 4 fundamental functions that are associated with human resources management. The acronym for the 4 functions is called PADS. The letter P within PADS stands for planning. The letter A stands for acquisition. The letter D stands for development. And lastly, the letter S stands for sanction. But first, let's start with P, planning. According to the CDC Workplace Health Promotion, planning includes developing communication strategies for leadership and employees, obtaining resources such as staff, equipment, or vendor contracts to provide programs and services, establishing data and informatics systems for program planning and evaluation. Personnel planning also includes knowing what tasks needs to be completed by the personnel of the program, knowing what knowledge or skills the personnel needs to complete the tasks, and the amount of people required to complete the task. Also, how much compensation is required for each job. These factors are all a part of planning. The next letter is A, acquisition of personnel. Acquisition includes the selection of personnel for the program. Acquisition of personnel include advertisement such as job postings online or even in career centers. Candidates will later be interviewed and the best of the best will be chosen. To begin with, there are 4 fundamental functions that are associated with human resources management. The acronym for the 4 functions is called PADS. P within PADS stands for planning, A stands for acquisition, D stands for development, and S stands for sanction. First, let's start with P, planning. According to the CDC Workplace Health Promotion, planning includes developing communication strategies for leadership and employees, obtaining resources such as staff, equipment, or vendor contracts to provide programs and services, establishing data and informatics systems for program planning and evaluation. Personnel planning also includes knowing what tasks need to be completed by the personnel of the program, knowing what knowledge or skills the personnel needs to complete the tasks, the amount of people required to complete the tasks, and how much compensation is required for each job. These factors are all a part of planning. The next letter is A, acquisition of personnel. Acquisition includes the selection of personnel for the program. Acquisition of personnel includes advertisement such as job postings online or even in career centers. Candidates will later be interviewed and the best of the best will be chosen. The next thing I will talk about is D for development. Development serves 2 major purposes. 1, to provide information to perform the job to the best of one's ability. 2, to introduce new personnel to the program environment by exposing them to expected behaviors, standards, values, and attitudes. Overall, development includes all the trainings and requirements to help a personnel perform their job to the best of their ability while still being highly competent. Some of these requirements might be orientations, professional growth opportunities, trainings, and more. The last fundamental factor within human resources management is sanctions. Sanctions involve maintaining the higher expectations and obligations that a personnel and manager might have together through discipline or grievances, personal rights, compensation, and health and safety. Another major resource is financial management. According to the textbook, financial management is the process of developing and using systems to ensure that funds are spent for the purposes for which they have been appropriated. Actual financial management kicks off when money has been collected and the program budget has been made. Financial management, which is handled by the program manager, starts with a system to record all transactions throughout the program. Transactions include funds coming into the program and going out. Funds going into the program are referred to as income. Examples of income are money, gifts, grants, and participation fees. Funds going out of the program are referred to as expenditures. Examples of expenditures are paying for salaries, wages, purchasing of materials, supplies, and equipment for the program. Some other terms that are commonly used within financial management are accounting, fiscal accountability, audit, external and internal audit. The act of recording transactions and summarizing them, along with seeing how transactions will affect the budget, is called accounting. According to the textbook, fiscal accountability is referred to as the extent to which resources are managed according to the budget. An audit is referred to as a review and confirmation that financial reports are accurate and that standard accounting procedures were used to prepare the reports. And lastly, an external audit is one that is conducted by a qualified and independent accountant once a year, while an internal audit is more frequently and is completed by an employee not responsible for accounting practices. The third major resource for establishing a system of management is technical resources management. Technical resources include every other resources besides human and financial. All other resources may include communication, equipment, expertise, information, materials, partnerships, relationships, space, and supplies. Out of all the categories of resources, technical may be the most challenging to manage because it is hard to express how much technical resources is needed for a program. Phase 4 of program implementation is simply putting the plans into action. There are 3 major ways of putting plans into action, which are using pilot testing, phasing them in, and initiating the total program. It is recommended that all programs go through these 3 stages. Even though it is recommended that programs go through these stages or strategies time constrained to resources, along with small priority populations, may not allow planners to go through this stage. First, let's focus on pilot testing. Pilot testing is very important because it allows planners to identify and work out any mistakes of the program before it is offered to a priority population. Pilot testing of a program should be performed on similar individuals and settings compared to the actual priority population and setting to get true results. If the pilot test does not use a similar population or setting, then problems within the program specific to the actual priority population will not be identified. After pilot testing a program, it is necessary to have program participants rate various aspects of the program so it can be revised and have feedback on how to revise program aspects. The second strategy for putting plans into action is phasing in. After a program has gone through pilot testing and revisions, it should be phased in if applicable, instead of implemented holistically. Programs should be phased in because it helps the planners and facilitators from getting too overwhelmed and getting themselves into something that is way over their head. It also gives planners more control over the program because it will be more manageable and easier to handle. The last strategy is total implementation. Total implementation is achieved through pilot testing and phasing in. Total implementation encompasses a first day of implementation or program kickoff. The first day of implementation requires special program such as deciding the day the program would start. It is recommended that planners launch their programs with already in place special event days which will increase promotion. For example, launching a weight loss program at the beginning of the year will coincide with New Year resolutions. Planners should also bring the program with excitement. For example, having a special guest or celebrity on the first day, health screenings or fairs or ribbon cutting. Overall, the first day of implementation is important and necessary. The final phase of the implementation process is deciding how long to keep or run a program. If a program has fulfilled its goals and objectives while serving to the priority population to its fullest potential, then a program can be ended. A program that has met these requirements can be ended because it has served its purpose. If a program has not met its goals or objectives and needs to be sustained longer, then techniques have been used just to do that. Some techniques include institutionalizing the program, seeking feedback from program participants, evaluating the program to show its worth, advocating for the program, partnering with other organizations with similar missions to share resources, and revising the rationale to create the program. These are the resources used for this presentation. These are the additional resources used for this presentation.